Today we are going to be adding and subtracting mixed numbers. So just like with fractions, we do have to have a common denominator. So our steps for adding mixed numbers, we add the fractions first. But before we can do that, where we spent the most of our time yesterday was where we found the LCD. And LCD stands for least common denominator. In other words, yesterday we said that was the least common multiple of your denominators. So once we find that least common denominator, we get our equivalent fractions. Then we add those, add the whole numbers, and simplify if necessary. So we're going to go ahead and work through a few examples together. The first one, we're going to find 2 1/3 plus 4 1/4. So step one is finding the LCD, or least common multiple of the denominators, and then come up with our equivalent fractions for with that denominator. So we have 1/3 and 1/4. That's what we got from up here, 1/3 and 1/4. So our LCM of 3 and 4 would be 12. So I'm going to rewrite my fractions. So I have 1/3 equivalent to a fraction with 12 on the bottom, and 1/4 equivalent to a fraction with 12 on the bottom. So when we do this, remember when we find equivalent fractions, we just multiply the top and bottom number by the same. So to get from 3 to 12, I would do 3 times 4. So I'm going to go 1 times 4. Over here, I would do 4 times 3. So I would do 1 times 3. So my new fractions are 4/12 and 3/12. So step 2 would just be adding those fractions. Then we're going to add the whole numbers from our mixed number. So my fractions now are 4/12 plus 3/12. So I have 4 plus 3. Remember, once we get that common denominator, we leave that the entire time. We don't change it. And then our whole numbers up here were 2 and 4. Okay, so then the last step, you just simplify if necessary, but we just put the fraction and the whole number together to get our mixed number. So our problem was 2 1/3 plus 4 1/4. Well, the 2 and 4 made 6. The 1/3 and 1/4 was the 7/12. So our final answer would be 6 and 7/12. Okay, go ahead and I'm going to have you pause your video and try this one on your own. So find your least common denominator of 3/8 and 1/2. Remember, be as efficient as possible. So rather than multiplying and using 16, I would just leave this as an 8 so that you have simpler numbers to work with. So I would do 3/8, just leave that as 3/8, and then change 1/2 so that you have an 8 on the bottom. So go ahead, pause your video, find that equivalent fraction, and finish step 2 and 3. And then you can unpause to check your work. Okay, so I kept 3/8 the same. I changed 1/2 to 4/8. So now I have 7/8, and then my whole numbers made 11. So my final answer is 11 and 7/8. All right, be sure to pause your video if you have any questions. But we're going to go ahead and flip to the next page, and we're going to have a couple of examples where we will have some regrouping. So if we look at this first one, we have 4 4/5 plus 2 9/10. So we're going to start just like we did on the front, where we find our LCD, or our least common multiple of our denominators. So in this case, 4/5 and 9/10, our least common multiple of 5 and 10 would be 10. So I'm going to change 4/5 to have 10 on the bottom. So 5 times 2 gives me 10. So I'm going to do 4 times 2 up here to get 8/10. 9/10, I'm just going to leave that as 9/10 since it already has a 10 to be as efficient as possible. Step 2, add the fractions and the whole numbers. So now I'm going to add the 8/10 and the 9/10. And we're going to end up with 17/10. Okay, our two whole numbers are 4 and 2, so we get 6. So now, when we look at our mixed number, we have 6 and 17/10. Now 17/10 itself is an improper fraction, So we are going to have to do some regrouping here. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take the 6 and 17/10, and I'm going to borrow 1 whole from the 17/10 and add it back onto the 6. Okay? So 17/10, I'm going to take 1 whole away from that. If we want 1 whole, we know that 1 whole with a fraction would just be the same number on the top and bottom. So in this case, 10 out of 10. So 1 whole in this case is 10/10. So I'm going to take 10/10 away from here, and I'm going to add it onto the 6. So what that looks like, okay, I'm going to take 1 from here. So now instead of 17/10, if I take 10 of those away, I now have 7/10. But I have to put that 1 whole back over here. 7. So my final answer would be 7 7/10. Again, make sure you're pausing your video to ask if you have any questions. And if you're watching from home, you can make notes in the margins to shoot me an email or ask in class. So this next example, 4 2/5 plus 6 7/10, I want you to try this same process here. So start by finding your least common denominator of 2/5 and 7/10. Okay, I'm going to use 10 on the bottom and keep 7/10 the same. So go ahead and get your equivalent fraction, add those together, and then add your whole numbers, and you will have to do some regrouping. So go ahead and pause and try this one, and then unpause to check your work. Okay, so my 2/5 became 4/10, and I added that to 7/10. That's where I got 11/10. My 2 whole numbers make 10 total, so I end up with 10 and 11/10, but this is an improper fraction. So I took 1 whole away from this, so I took 10 away, so I only had 1 left out of 10, but I had to add that 1 whole back on here. So my final sum would be 11 1/10. Okay, we are going to go through these same steps, but we're going to do this with subtracting. So I'm going to flip to the next page. Okay, you should see the steps again at the top. Same process here. We're going to subtract our fractions, get an least common denominator if we need to, then subtract the whole numbers and simplify. So these first two, we won't have to do any regrouping, but we'll look at a couple of examples where we do. So we have 5 2/3 minus 2 1/6. So we're going to find our least common denominator of 2/3 and 1/6 and just rename the fractions, which is creating equivalent fractions. So for 3 and 6, my least common denominator is going to be 6. I know we tend to want to multiply those and use 18. That will get you the same answer, but it's more efficient to use the least common denominator. There is less simplifying. So I'm going to use 6 in this case. So 2/3, I'm going to get a fraction with 6 on the bottom. So 3 times 2 gets me to 6, so I'm going to multiply 2 at the top as well. So I end up with 4/6. My other fraction is 1/6, so it's just going to stay the same. So now I can go ahead and subtract my fractions. Since this is subtraction, you cannot change the order. You must leave them in the order that they're written. So 4/6 minus 1/6. Okay, so that becomes 3/6. My whole numbers are 5 and 2, so there's 3. So 5 minus 2 was 3, 2/3 minus 1/6, there's my 3/6. So in this case, we do need to simplify the fraction, so it actually becomes 3 1/2. Okay, I want you to pause your video and try this bottom one on your own, so get a least common denominator for 3/4 and 1/2. Subtract your fractions, subtract your whole numbers, and then you can unpause to check your work. Okay, so I changed 1/2 to 2/4. So when I subtracted, I had 1/4 left. Subtracting my whole numbers, I got 2. No need to simplify. We end up with 2 1/4. All right, again, make sure you're pausing or making note of any questions as we move along. We are going to work through 2 more examples, and these ones are going to involve a little bit of borrowing and regrouping like we did with addition, but we're still subtracting here. So in our first example, 6 1/2 minus 2 3/4. We're going to find our LCD. We have 1/2 and 3/4. So we're going to keep it simple and just use 4. So 1/2. Okay, we want 4 on the bottom. So 2 times 2 gets me to 4. 1 times 2, I'm going to have 2/4. I'm going to keep 3/4 the same. So now what happens here is we have 2/4 minus 3/4. We cannot change the order, and we can't subtract that without getting a negative number. So what we want to do is we want to rename 6 2/4. We need to do a little bit of borrowing here. So what this looks like, it's kind of the reverse of what we did with addition. So I'm going to take 6 2/4. Okay, so that's the 6 1/2 that we have here, but it's written as 6 2/4. So what I want to do is I want to add more to this numerator. So this time I'm going to take 1 whole away from the 6. Okay, and in this case, we're working with pieces of size 1/4, so 1 whole would be 4/4. And I'm going to add that 1 whole back on to 2/4. So what this looks like, I'm taking 1 whole away from 6, so it's now 5. Okay, but that I'm adding that whole onto here. So 4 pieces of size 1/4. Instead of 2 pieces of size 1/4, I now have 6. Okay, so now I'm subtracting 6/4 and 3/4. So we end up with 3/4. Okay, my whole numbers now are 5 and 2. So our final answer is 3 3/4. Okay, we're going to do this one more time. So down here at the bottom, we're going to do some regrouping again in the end. So go ahead and find your LCD. Okay, 8 and 4, rename your fractions. You will not be able to subtract those once you rename your fractions. So you will have to regroup. I want you to pause this one, try that on your own, then unpause and check it. Okay, so a quick check from here. I changed 3/4 to 6/8. We cannot take 5/8 minus 6/8. So the 6 5/8, we're going to rename that. So we're going to do some regrouping. So I took 1 from the 6, so it's now 5, but I had to add that whole onto 5/8, 13/8. Okay, so now go ahead and subtract those fractions and subtract your whole numbers. So I took the 13/8, and this time I can take 6/8 from that, so I have 7. Then my whole numbers are now 5 and 3, so I have 2. So my final answer is 2 7/8. Please remember, if you have questions, let me know. Otherwise, you are ready to start your homework. You must be working everything out on paper first. So you should have a piece of paper, number them as you go so that if you make a mistake, we can go back and see where. And then you can just keep that paper in your binder and submit your homework online on Big Ideas.